皆さん、こんにちは。総合地球環境学研究所の阿部でございます。Symposium
Good evening, everyone. This is Ave from RIHN.
山際十一に代わりまして、この
And before the opening, on behalf of Yamagiwa,
有料の
Juichi, director of the institute, I would like to express our deep concern about the current situation in Ukraine.
環境問題の解決
We believe that solving global environmental problems and building world
と
peace
いうよりも、
are structurally the
対
same
立する問題に
and at the root
どのように考え
share the same problem.
地域、文化、価値観
So it is necessary to transcend regional cultural differences and differences in values, as well as mistrust, inequality, and
の目的を
prejudice in order to reach a common goal. We firmly believe
安易
that
な
what is needed to achieve this goal is
ではなく、
not easily resulting to power and violence, but the wisdom of humanity's capacity for dialogue and compassion.
さて、最初に簡単に、総合地球環境学研究所地球研につい
I'd
て
like to introduce the Research
これは
Institute for Humanity and Nature.
文化的
The RIHN was established 20 years ago in Kyoto as an academic institution to study environmental issues from cultural approach.
大学協力協
As an inter-university research institute, we aim to build a global environmental studies that contribute to solving environmental problems by selecting projects with clear objectives for a limited period of time and the three programs based on a long-term
私は
perspective through public solicitation.
詳しく説明します。
Let me explain about the cultural approach.
日高俊
As the first director, Hidaka
環
Toshitaka
境の根源
emphasized, the cause of environmental
地
problems
球の関係
lies in the distorted relationship between humanity and
私
nature.
自然の関係
The relationship between humans and nature is embedded in the lives or cultures of people who have lived in various regions for many years.
普段意識すること
If
のない
we are not
そ
usually
こでの生活や価値
aware
観
of it,
思想
culture is a
それらが
source of our
新たな
lives,
新
values,
発見
thoughts,
とな
and
る
even new
地球
ideas.
研の掲げる
The cultural
在り
approach
方
of
と
the
は一
RIHN
つ
is based
自然
on
科学の
the
総合による
objective
客
facts
観的な
of
事実
natural
を基礎
science
として
and aim to
地域
clarify
ごとの人と
the
自然の文
relationship
化
between humans
行
and
動
nature in
文化を
each
通じて
region
尊重
and
し
to use
地域そして地
culture
球
as a
との
source of
共通の課
knowledge
題であ
to
ることを
solve
理解
global
理解
environmental
することが
problems, which are common challenges for the
そして
region and for
これを
all
通じて
humanity.
この
That is
総
why the
合地球
RIHN
系の
is a
研究
member
所
of the
という
National Institute
ふう
for
に自分たちで
Humanities,
位置づ
along
け
with
て
five
おり
other
ます
research institutes in
しか
humanities.
しながらこの文化的アプローチには
And there are
多くの問
barriers
題
to
点大
cultural
きな課題が
approaches
ございます
that must be
地球
overcome.
上の異なる自然環
Culture
境
is
が
created by
自然
people
そ
who
し
have
て
lived in
共存
different
して
natural environment
地
on
球を
Earth.
生み出してきたのが
Thus,
文化で
cultures
ありま
tend
す
to be
文化を通じて
regionally,
地域固有の問題
regionally specific.
その地の風土に根ざした
However, global
解決
environmental
策
issues go
しかし
beyond local
地球環境問題それ自体は
cultures.
地域固有の文化を超えたところにありますいつの間にか我々は
Somewhere along the
地域固
way,
有の
we
価値
have
観
left our
あ
familiar
るいは体験を
ambient world,
忘れてし
Fudo,
まい
and
リアル
become
な現実
embedded
的実相
in
に
an
焦点を
unusually
当てていく
complex
まさに今しがない
techno-institutionalized
時に
society.
なってしまいました人新世
This is
人
the
文明
era of the
そして
Anthropocene,
普遍的な近代技術
the
と社会科学
accumulation
が
of our
社
individual
会生
lives
活の中
relying
に
on
積み重ねていき
universal modern
我々の
technology
少
and
ししか
wisdom
いい選択
has
ができ
brought a
なくなり
limit to the massive
今
global
求めら
system.
れているのは
What is
少し
required now
関
is
係を
to
再構築
reconstruct
す
the
ることが
relationship
求められている
between humans and nature.
これはグローバルなバナ
So
キュラ
you
リズ
might
ム
call
と
it
言ってもいいかもしれま
global
せん
vernacularism.
再び地域
It is
そ
necessary
の風
for
土
us
に根
to
ざし
once again take
静かな
root
生活を
in
通じ
our
て
local regions and
人間の思想を通して
Fudo's ambient world,
自然を再構
stop
築
and reflect on our own lives and redefine
そのため
nature
今
as
回
an
のシンポ
idea
ジウムで
of
は
humankind.
生活における基礎
For
的
this
な自然
reason, in this
その基礎
symposium, we
的
have
な価値
decided to
に
return
注
to
目をい
art
たしました
as a fundamental creative
かつて
space
ギリシャ
in
は
our
その同じ
lives.
言葉でした
Technology and art
自
used to
然の
be the
中に存
same
在する
word
自然を
as
支配する
technology
人間
born out of
動物
nature
が人間を
came
支
to
配する
dominate
こ
nature
れからと
and
同じよ
art
うに
moved away from
しかしそ
daily
れらと
life.
乖離したまま
The
進
two
んできました
became widely
その後
divergent.
芸術とともに社会
When
が進んできました
redefining nature around art,
それは
the
動
garden
物
is
が
an
人間を支
important
配することに
perspective that
それ
provides
は
a
労
clue.
働と休息の場であ
The
ったり
garden is a
社
place
会
of
が心
work
から
and
感謝する
rest
自然を
and an ideal
つまり創造
representation
的に
of
表現しているものと
nature
考
that
えられます
cultivates the body and mind. The garden is a symbolic representation of the relationship between humans and nature, a silent messenger that reminds us of the long history of interaction with the non-human others found there, such as plants, trees, animals, insects, soil, and stones. In the history of mankind, gardening has also been closely associated with both gathering and agriculture, and the concept and techniques of the garden, including a wide range of activities and domains, can be considered to represent microcosm of the diverse nature of a particular region and the art of people living in it. I might have spoken a bit longer, but this symposium was planned by Daniel Niles, a colleague of mine, and his counterpart, Frederick Julian, of the School for Advanced Studies in Social Science of France, on the basis of research conducted by our colleagues of the RIHN. I would like to ask Frederick to talk about background of the symposium and aim of the symposium in more details. That's all from me. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Abe-san. So, thank you for the invitation to speak. I'm Frédéric Julien. I'm a French anthropologist. And I would like to point, as Abe-sensei just did, that this symposium is opening in a particular time, that of a major conflict in Europe. And that on behalf of the HS presidents, I apologize for the absence of a representative who are very busy with the Ukrainian student, in addition to the exit of the COVID at this time. Because even if the brutality of President Putin outweighs everything else, the latest IPCC report published last week is just as alarming. By our vulgar and predatory extractive action on the planet since the Industrial Revolution and its global consequences on global warming, ocean acidification, water scarcity, droughts, typhoons, and so on, we humans, whether we like it or not, have gone in war with the Earth. For several decades, since the first oil shock in 1974, we have become aware of the limit of the resource and unlimited consumption. But we have not changed our behaviors and attitudes. Why? Before, after, downstream, among, here, there, us, them. The second and deeply embedded dualism with which we will live and think are extremely difficult to overcome. Are they impossible? Will all our intelligence gathered in this meeting be enough? I don't know. In any case, this symposium, supported by the Institute of Humanity and Nature, is an ambitious first step to respond to this dramatic emergency, with the general question underlying all our concerns. How can we make peace with the planet? To answer this question, then with Daniel Niles and Abe Kanichi, we have proposed 4 main lines of thought, some of which have already been worked before COVID in Paris, in particular with Augustin Berg during the symposium Does Nature Think? The second, already formulated by Abe, concerns the garden as a microcosm and a macrocosm. The transversal question for us is also to understand how the long history of human culture, taken in their continuity, in their unity, and in their diversity, can provide us with concrete models to respond to the current crisis. To do so, we have opted for a particular style of meeting, both academic and public, a symposium that is as much as bottom-up as top-down, because we are all concerned. Our choice is also to rely on all knowledge and experiences, those of the natural sciences, but also those of human sciences, but also those of artists and craftsmen, of farmers. In fact, with the idea to blend as much as possible rational and sensitive intelligences, without, of course, neglecting the vernacular knowledge. The objective is to imagine possible solutions to compose and live on our unique planet, or to say it differently, how to find the good human measure. Faced with the over-equipped, over-instrumented universe that we have generated, how can we disarm ourselves? To initiate this debate, we are honored to welcome two major actors of the reflection and research action in Japan. Juichi Yamagiwa, Director General of Research Institute for Humanity and Nature, and Oussouby SACKO, I just saw him, President of Seika University. Professor Yamagiwa is, I remind you, an eminent primatologist, specialist in gorillas and in evolution of hominoids, our superfamily. Professor SACKO is an architect and a urban planner, specialist in the ways of building and living in Africa and Asia. Both are men passionately committed to their fields, but the works they have respectively accomplished are embodied in collective projects, at the center of which we find people and the common good, as much as demanding research. So, how to begin this dialogue after these introductions, which are certainly too talkative? Perhaps with two questions to the specialists there. So let me ask to Professor Yamagiwa a general question. How does your experience as a primatologist serve you today to address this issue of how to face Anthropocene? And to Professor SACKO, what does mean the question of the arts of living with nature for an architect? Or more specifically, how do the arts of inhabiting the world studied by architecture provide sustainable questions? So let me leave you the floor, the screen. Thank you very much.
Julian, thank you very much. さあ、ここからは日本語で話しますよ。皆さん。
Thank you very much, Julian, and hello, good afternoon, good evening, and good morning. This is Yamagiwa speaking. With regard to Professor SACKO, we are very old and good friends, but our expertise and the area of discipline are quite different. So I am looking forward to our discussion. So with regard to this topic, let me say a few words. As has been said, I have researched the gorillas in Africa in many years. And there are chimpanzees living with gorillas, and there are other types of monkeys, and there are many, many other animals, buffaloes, elephants, hippopotamus, and also human beings. They all live in the tropical rain woods in Africa, and I actually think it is a common woods. The animals living in the rainforest are not being rejected. They are all welcomed And also, there are many different types of living matters living together, and they are living in their separate lives. But the tropical rainforest is not destroyed. And the theme for this symposium is garden. Garden is approached by human beings, and with the feelings of the human beings, there are some approaches made to the garden. And what is the origin of gardens, I wonder? I think it is the tropical forest in Africa. The tropical forests in Africa are the gardens of different animals, I think. For example, the gorillas. Gorillas love fruits, and they travel 500 meters to 3 kilometers to look for fruits, and they exceed them as feces, and from that, the seeds are dropped to the soil, and then again the fruits start to grow. So this is being repeated for many, many years, and therefore, naturally, they increase the trees of the fruits that they love. It is like the human beings harvesting and also developing the crops that they like in agriculture. So the garden of gorillas reside in the tropical forest in Africa. What is different from the human beings is the human beings harvest the land for themselves. But in case of gorillas, what they are doing is they're developing the land for different types of animals, and there are food chains for different types of animals developed in the gardens that they create in the African rainforest. So, Sako-san, you do research on the city planning, the landscape of cities. People build houses. And do you think gardens are necessary for each houses? Thank you for the question. As Professor Yamagiwa said, we have been long friends, but our area of expertise are different. But I don't think our field of expertise are so different. I think we have something in common. Maybe it's the concept of place. Whether the animals live in this place or the humans live in this place, maybe that's the difference. But in my research, after I have come to Japan, I have become more conscious of gardens. Before I came to Japan, I did not have the image of gardens. In doing research in Africa, there is a plaza, and people gather in the plaza, and there are trees. And also, there are plazas or gardens in the houses, and there are trees planted, and the fruits are eaten by the people, and also by the birds and the animals. So the relationship between the animal or the nature and the human beings are quite close. Also, in terms of circulation, I had done research on a certain ethnical village, and their the basis is that they grow rice. But they do not take the root of the trees or of their crops, but they just cut the surface, and the rest of the root is being eaten by the cows that are grown by other livestock growers. And also, when we build a house, in order to strengthen the soil, the feces are mixed to the soil to strengthen the foundation. And also, cow feces can be a fuel in order to burn fire. So the relationship between nature and people are very close in Africa. In case of Japan, the garden is something separate from human beings. it's borrowing the benefit of the or the blessing of the nature, and it is very something that is very self-satisfactory. The gardens in Europe and also the gardens in Japan, probably there are philosophies behind them, but gardens are something that are created by human beings for the sake of human beings in Japan and Europe, I think. Thank you very much for your comment. There is Satoyama in Japan, and I think this is something one step before garden. There's the Japan archipelago, and there from north to south there is the mountain range, and there are forests at all times, and it is the world of formal, and the world that we live in is the world of secular. But between the mountainous sacred mountains and the secular human area, there is Satoyama. Satoyama can be used by human beings and also by the wildlife. We go to Satoyama to get materials for various buildings, for example, and also the wildlife goes to Satoyama to find their food. And from Satoyama develops a garden which human beings have created. But in case of gardens in Japan, there are plants and flowers, and there are insects and birds that come into the garden. And also the insects make sounds that can create a very nice atmosphere in case of Japanese gardens. So in case of Japanese gardens, we do not reject the animals that come into the garden. But in Japan, we have so-called mitate. We think of the garden as of some scenery. So it is a product of imagination. Garden is a product of imagination. And I think this is very unique to Japan. If you talk about Satoyama, I can understand what the concept of Satoyama. When I do research in the villages of Africa, these villages have this concept of Satoyama. They live in the borderline between nature and artificial world, and they have a close relationship with nature. So in case of Japanese gardens, they try to bring the nature that exists far away closer to oneself. And when you bring that closer to yourself, there are various selections made in a sensitive way. I think the level is very high. But if you ask me whether the nature is fully reproduced, I do not think so. People enjoy looking at the garden. Of course, they take care of the garden, but there is not very much hard work that is put in. And if you ask me where there is hard work put in, so if you ask me whether this is truly nature, I don't think so. I did research on a view top in case of view top, the view top's value, sense of value, and the Japanese gardens are different.
Well, the Japanese gardens are well sophisticated. For example, if you go to RIHN stone garden, that is consists of the rocks and sand, and that shows the sea, river, mountains. That is very different from the nature. And also the bonsai, it's a miniaturized tree, like pine trees and others. But we actually see them as a big natural trees. That is very similar. So Japanese, or for example, in Chinese, they created golden fish. Those are miniature fish, but the Japanese created gardens in comparison with real nature, borrowing an escape from the real nature. So Sako-san, you have been in China, you have been in Europe, you came from Mali originally, so I believe you know different type of houses in different parts of the world. But in principle, so as I said, they are plaza, squares, or open spaces. And so people use that space for cultivations and others. So do you see any commonality between those areas, between different regions around the world? So you're asking about gardens in different parts of the world? Yes. Well, so gardens I have witnessed so far, well, they have the function of beauty as well as function of utility. However, when I come to Japan, when I came to Japan, Japan garden focus on much more aesthetic kind of function. We don't really use the garden going inside there in Japan. And but what is important, so you mentioned the commons before. In a moment, the space can be shared by people and meaning of the space could be viewed by people. So gardening is not for individual. Gardening is something that is shared among different people. And gardening is something that is used by different people. Sometimes gardening is shared by people. Gardens is sometimes shared by people and nature. Gardening is not egoistic, but if you think about it, the definition of gardens, where the definition of garden comes from? That's my question. Well, I think our definition of garden comes from the commons. Well, gardening is something that people share. But in case of Japan, we view garden as a group, and so the garden is actually shared by people, and also maybe in gardens in other regions, people actually share such space. But what about the gardens in Anthropocene? Now, we sometimes see the gardens on top of buildings, or they create farmland on the top of the buildings. Now, people are concentrated in urban areas. Now, about 50% of the people live in urban space. And urban space is basically far away from nature. And people wish to bring in nature into the urban space for their well-being. So you are landscape architect. People not only for function or beauty, maybe people want to fill some kind of gap in their spirit. Well, that is very important issue. We often talk about Anthropocene a lot nowadays. And over the last 50 years, we destroyed natures and we try to recover the nature we distracted. One of the example is garden on the top of the building. When we think about buildings, we often try to incorporate nature and also the wind, how the wind comes through the building. We want to bring in natural flow of wind, or maybe we want to incorporate sound of nature into the urban space. And in designing works, how much space people want to occupy or people want to destroy, this is a part of the question that we still face. For example, I designed a house in Mali several years ago, and I designed a large number of gardens. I tried to kind of fuse between Japan and Mali, so I brought a stone from Shirakawa or Kamagawa, and I brought some Japanese traditional materials like lanterns to Mali as well. And then actually after I designed such a house with large, many gardens, the people complain because they wish to have a open space where they can eat together or enjoy together. So this is actually a contradiction. So how we're going to overcome such a contradiction? In taking example of Japan, when I was a student, I was involved in experimental architectural design, and I was involved in designing rooftop gardens. That was quite very large. But with the rooftop gardens, the wild birds came back to the city, and then I conducted the research with the residents. And actually, what I found was the complaint. There were many complaints from residents because the leaf that's coming out from the top rooftop gardens, and also sometimes they see the excrement of insect or some birds that's falling on their residence. So that result was a surprise. So it's a really human-centric view. When I speak with the vegetable shop owners, I think our discussion went into about human centricity, how we can overcome human centricity. The garden is a culture. Culture cannot be detached from nature. So culture is created in the nature, in the surrounding areas. So SACKO-san, you were born in Mali, that is savanna, and also the tropical rainforest where I conducted research for Go River. I think the nature is very different. And thinking about the rainfall in Japan, Japan is very close to the subtropical region. And in Tokyo, there are more than, well, in some part of Japan, there are more than 10,000 waterfall. And then, for example, in Kyoto, even that trees and plants grow naturally because of the high rainfalls that attract many insects as well and require a lot of maintenance works. But still, taking such an effort, they wish to create an ideal gardens. I think garden architect wish to create ideal gardens. And as you go close to the tropical area, the nature without any maintenance grows uncontrollably. And I think people living in those areas sometimes feels resignation because nature grows uncontrollably. They can't really control it. And also the turf. There are many, and if you go to different parts of the world, and especially in areas where you see a lot of turf, in such an areas they don't need a lot of maintenance works. So I think gardening is a place where humans have a dialogue with God. So they create gardens from the view of God, not from the viewpoint of the people. But in Japan, the gardens are basically for commoners. Of course, there are gardens for feudal lords, but most of the Japanese gardens are for commoners. And basically, Japanese people who traditionally have a faith in God in mountains. And they pray God, which live in mountains, and then they created Satoyama, where you have a connection between God and human being. And when it comes to garden, so the natural phenomena exist in nature. So if you go around the gardens, you are able to speak with spirits. For example, in summer bond season, Japanese people decorate garden. And then, for example, in Kyoto, we create a Chinese character, the beak, on the mountain by banana trees. That is actually a ritual to welcome God to the villages, cities. That's basically where human can speak with God or spirit, or can speak with nature as well.
ちょっと日本の庭の印象を言うとですね、
So my impression of the Japanese gardens is as follows. I have worked with the gardeners for several years in Japan, and I have observed different gardens in Japan, and we created gardens together in Japan. And the impression that I have of the Japanese gardens is that, as you have said, Japanese gardens are creative, and also the Japanese people are so creative that the Japanese people imagine gods. It's very convenient to think that gods are everywhere. I think this is based upon story. And when creating a garden too, there are faces, there are backs. And so I kind of feel a lot of excuses made in the gardens of Japan. And also the form is based upon nature. The form is very natural. And also in creating gardens, I sometimes wonder, are there so many trees, different kinds of trees? The Japanese gardeners are based upon waza, and they are inherited down the different generations. And they are also creators of stories. That's my impression of Japanese gardening. And what is most interesting is that, logically speaking, in case of Japan, it's not based upon design, but it is more artistic. It is art. In case of European gardens, it's a very technique, based upon technology, and it's design. So I think that's the greatest difference between the European gardens and the Japanese gardens, design or art. In case of African gardens, uh, including plazas and many other things, um, we do not want to go into nature so much. We do not want to get too close to nature. We want to keep some distance with nature in Africa. But in case of Japan, you want to get sometimes so close to nature that you create nature, you create gods. So in Africa, it's neither art nor design in case of African garden. That is because the African nature is a threat. It is very scary to human beings. That's my impression after having gone to Africa. And your contrast between art and design is very interesting. Since human beings started to speak, to have language, we started to create stories. And you say that the Japanese gardens are stories. And that is because through language, we imagine various things. And we try to transcend, or we try to do mitate using the true nature into the garden. And so by reassembling nature, we create gardens. So if going apart from gardens, about art, since you are the president of a university of art, so I'd like to ask you, speaking of art, when was it created for human beings and for what purpose? That's a very difficult question. You're trying to give me a hard time. No, I'm very interested in your response.
これってちょっと日本の大学でアートを語るとまた
To speak of art in the Japanese universities is quite different because the area of art, the field of art,
あそこも結構宗教が背景だったりとか
has a background of religion.
ヨーロッパ、イタリアとかそこら辺
In Europe, Italy, for example, if the art was originated in those areas,
なすものすべてアートとみなすって
uh,
いうのがまず最初
there's one way of thinking that everything human beings can, even everything that human beings do can be an art. So everything that is created from the minds of the human beings can be considered as art. That's one definition. And you empathize and you share that. So through art, you can send a message. You can convey something through art. So people who are engaged in art try to express their inner thought to the outside. And when art came into Japan, I think it came into Japan with some kind of formality. So when we speak of art in the Japanese schools, it's quite framed. But originally, art is something that is created naturally by human beings. And I think that is the broad understanding of art. So every expression can be art. That's my definition of art.
そうするとね、
So if that is the case,
コミュニケーションの一つだ
I think art is one way of communication.
まあ自己表現
Sako-san said that self-expression, self-assertion is art.
からね、要するにその自然に働きかけるっていうのは
So to approach nature, animals approach nature to hide or to eat or to sleep.
生活に密着
So it is very closely
その
connected to life. But in case of the creation of art, apart from animals, when human beings started to use language in order to convey something, in order to communicate, in order to express oneself, art was created. Is my understanding correct? Art is something that is relational between the one who creates art and the one who receives art. In one project, we talked about the violence of art, art and religion, and so forth. So to begin with, I think art used to be something universal. So as you play, when you create something, or when you organize yourself, you find something that can be an art. But by sending messages, you try to control the others. And I think that is based upon religion. So the art positioning has changed with taking in religion. But the art that I would like to talk about is more universal and for commons. And everything we do can be an art. And maybe there is an intention to communicate within the art. Or maybe without intention, sometimes the receiver of the art tries to receive a message through an art. So art can be used for communication, but for communication, there needs to be no formality or form. By creating form, there are various value added to sell, to buy, to be talented. But actually, I think art is for everyone. Art can be created by anyone, but by adding some format, the meaning of art can be lost. So in that sense, the Japanese gardens is trying to be an art because gardens are based upon formality. There is mitate, there is a borrowed scenery, and with the skills, with waza, something is being tried to be reproduced. That's the case in gardens in Japan. So gardens are not naturally nature, but nature and garden are different. I think this is based upon the Japanese sense of nature. The difference between nature and garden, I'm talking about human gardens. Humans tries to make nature static. Actually, nature is dynamic. It is moving at all times. There are various living matters related to nature, and nature changes its shape. Nature changes at all time. But garden tries to make nature static, to stop the nature. So in case of Japanese gardens, we mow the lawn, or we cut the trees and the branches, and to keep the shape as is. So we try to make this nature static. When I was researching on about gorillas in Africa, people were not so conscious of gardens. It was a place to do fire, to enjoy fire, or to dance, or to eat. So because the African people are not so conscious of the moving, the dynamic aspect of nature. What you're doing in the city, in the urban life, everything that you see in the cities is the production of industry. So it's industrial product. So it's very static. The houses are very static. They don't change their form. But we try to incorporate nature, which is changing at all times, or else the human spirit cannot be calmed. So the human beings are they want to have some relationship with something that changes from time to time, and they want to grow. They want to cultivate something. They want to grow the plants with fertilizers and by clipping the branches. So we want to have some relationship with something that is changing at all times. We want to participate in the change, and we want to try to control the change. And I think that is what we're looking for in the gardens in the cities.
So before talking about an urban gardens, just want to share with you some things that I was so surprised. When I conducted research on desert, the landscape I can see on the way cannot be the same when I come back. For example, in the desert, it's dynamic. It's always changes, meaning that we can't come back by ourselves if we go there inside the desert. But local people can read wind, therefore they can tell where to go. And also in the night, they see stars to get the orientation. So nature, in their sense, include cosmos as well, the universe as well. But in the urban areas, we see gardens in the areas where we can see within the framework of a viewpoint, we see a garden in urban areas. But actually, you can't really reproduce the real nature into the garden. And if you go to Mali, local people see a lot of things in annual cycle, and they have a holistic view on nature. So if you think about when you create an urban city, you can create something that is holistic. Therefore, what is created in the city is not representative of nature. Usually, gardens created in the cities are the gardens from the viewpoint of human beings. Although people try to design nature into the garden. However, it's just like a self-satisfaction only because they can really represent nature into the gardens. So as you said, in the tropical rainforest, I couldn't really come back when I went inside the tropical rainforest. And when I walk with the GPS, actually local people go around. They do not walk straight. They actually go around. But of course, they know the best path to go forward in the forest. And also they go the path where the wild animals walk through. And so local people have a sense of local land, where to walk, what is the shortest way to reach destination. But in Japan, maybe Japanese people have lost that kind of sense. When we started farming, cutting land into smaller lots to grow. So for example, in your design work, you actually draw lines, right? But the lines are not there in nature. So simple lines and circles, maybe gardens is a representation of the wish of the people who want to go outside such simple drawing like lines and circles. Well, in a nutshell, some people at crisis. So looking back on 15th century, that time of Da Vinci, well, since then, people cannot live being a human being. Therefore, everything is adapted for human being. There's no recognition human being as part of nature. And also, when you design a garden, there is a certain space where human beings can control. Maybe, the garden is space itself is defined by people, whether that is a commoner or king or whoever. But actually, the nature is a whole that is there without any boundary. So when we speak of the commons, same time we talk about boundary. So when it comes to city, the basic concept is where the boundary lies. But in nature, you don't see any boundaries. And people, who live in the nature, they don't see boundary in nature. But now, people who live in cities, they always think about boundaries. That is expressed in different ways. Exactly. Usually in Japan, the rivers delineate boundaries. But when you talk about society, society is invisible, right? But if you say a state, we are able to see the border of countries. So human beings try to imagine something invisible. And in cities, maybe the road or bridge or buildings, they are designed in a way that can be explicitly shown to show boundaries. But when it comes to Satoyama, there's no clear boundaries. And that is basically a nature. So due to urbanization, without boundaries, that we are not comfortable in living, so we need some rules or boundaries to live in cities. So as SACKO-san said, if you leave garden as natural as possible, then they attract wild animals or wild birds, insects, and people sometimes complain, and people sometimes fight, saying, "This is your garden, that you have to take care of it. Don't cause any trouble to my area." So that is an age where we live in Anthropocene. Yeah, exactly. So we can't reach a conclusion in our dialogue, but using boundary, we limit our activity as well. If there were no boundary, maybe people would have been able to take care of each other. But now, with boundaries, people try to control. Well, actually, I am a reviewer for architect journals, and there is a specific definition of Nagaya. So the one definition of Nagaya is that the floor shouldn't be shared. So the floor belongs to a family or an individual. The floor should never be shared. That is the definition of Nagaya that actually interested me a lot. So people live together, but in order to live together, there must be boundaries. There must be um, some kind of sense of ownership. And the house is actually the representation of the boundary. And garden can be connected to multiple houses. Pasture is one of the example, and also in Africa, there are shared gardens among different families. But now, with the urbanization, we have lost that kind of shared gardens. It's might be a way to redefine our contemporary world. Maybe people are not comfortable in living without having clear boundaries. People have lost confidence. People want to create boundaries with nature, and with other people. Even it's a small space, they want to have their own space. They want to say that this is my own space, and that is different from animal, right? But what is interesting is the newly developed houses, and for that you have a clear lines on the land to delineate boundaries with your neighbors, and also land price is determined or decided. In the past, there was no fixed price of land, but now the land price is the price of human being. So say one lot is discussed. Maybe 1 square meter costs this much. And that creates a lot, a plot. And then value of the people is determined by the land value where they live.
ちょっとそのやっぱり都市化というのが大きな
So urbanization, I think, is the big problem. As you say, the populations in Asia and Africa is growing, and people are moving into the urban cities. And the relationship with nature is changing. And also the ecology and the ecological system is changing together with that. So when we think of nature, we always have to consider urban cities, urbanization as well. So how are we going to relate to the cities is one thing that we really have to think about. artificially we can bring nature into the cities. This is possible, and we can reproduce nature close to us. But I wonder how this will develop going forward. Let me tell you what I think. As SACKO-san, as you say, the way of cities need to be changed, I think. Cities are something that is heavily populated, created artificially. And but what we have to think of creating cities is circulation and relationship. In the cities, we live without knowing who lives next door. And however, I think there needs to be some circulation in the city so that people can move around, so that people are not fixed into a certain place. And with that, I think we can recreate the relationship between cities and the nature. So we need to increase the commons. We have to increase the common land. And for that, I think we need to reconsider gardens. Gardens can be common land, maybe a park. In Kyoto, actually, there are such things. Uh, People try to create common gardens with next doors, for example. Correct me if I'm wrong, but I think there is a system in Kyoto City to support that. But the DNA of human beings do not accept that. We don't want to be so linked with the next door neighbor. Of course, that gives us a larger garden, and also in terms of disaster prevention, that is good to have a connection with the next door garden because you can create a patio or a plaza. But in our genes, in our DNA, we reject that. There are so many shrines and temples, and this is all common land. We need to open this common land to the people more to be used in different ways. As Professor Burke said, what is different in Japan to Europe is that there are lots of greenery in the cities because we have temples and shrines, and I think this is the strength of Japanese cities. I think this is true. I think that is the strength of Japanese cities. And when we reconsider the cities, it doesn't have to be all artificial, man-made. We can leave some open space, nature, to enrich our souls, the minds of the human beings. And I think that is a responsibility of architects at the same time. In order to create cities, we shouldn't concentrate so much on economy. So with regard to commons or public assets, including cultural assets as well, I think we need to increase this so that cities can be something that can enrich the minds and the souls of human beings. And so the relationship between nature and cities becomes very, very important. Okay, thank you. So you seem to enjoy your dialogue. You can continue forever, I think, but we have to conclude at 8:30, and also we need to introduce some programs going forward for the rest of the week. So we have about 15 or 20 more minutes to follow up on this dialogue. But you have covered so many things. I think it's good that you were able to cover a broad field. But again, two of you will have to come back on the last day to kind of compile the total conversation. So when we think or when we hear the word garden, I think different people think of different gardens. Of course, as I am a Japanese, I think of Japanese gardens, but there are different gardens. As Sako-san said, Japanese gardens are art and the Western gardens are design or techno-oriented. And Africa, you said that you try to keep some distance with nature. This is different from the Japanese garden concept. So there are different concepts of garden all over the world. And how can we leverage this concept of garden. There are different ways of relationship between humans and nature in different parts of the world, but we have a common theme or topic or subject of the global environment. And so from now, what kind of gardens do we need to create in order to tackle this global environmental issue? And also, we would like to think of art, the power of art in creating gardens going forward. One of the solution or answer is the garden is a place for socialization. The socialization is being destroyed nowadays because people talk online, and of course, because of COVID, we have to have social distance. But a garden is a reflection of the culture of the local area. And in the gardens of local area, people can get together and to socialize. And by respecting the culture, by respecting the local nature, people intertwine with each other. And this is led to the respect towards the culture. And people need to also relate with each other equally in gardens. Yes, Sako-san said the gardens are a place. And Yamagiwa-san said that it is a communication. And at the same time, gardens are a place for socialization. What do you think, Sako-san? Yes, I think gardens are a place and a place for socialization. I agree. So the place, whether the place should be used as a natural nature, or should we add something artificially, add something man-made to make it more convenient, or to pull in something natural from the wild nature. In creating cities, the city culture are different. Cities are created based upon Western culture, and so the natural nature, the social place in cities is considered to be something brought in from the Western area. Is nature necessary for a place for socialization? We have tea ceremonies in Japan, in Japanese gardens. If we don't have that place of a garden, we cannot have nodate tea ceremony. So it is a style. Of course, we have tablecloth and dishes for socialization in the house. And also we can have tea ceremonies indoor as well. But we do tea ceremonies overseas because nature is the decoration, can be the scenery, the decoration, the environment, the decoration for tea ceremony. And the way we behave and also the food we eat can differ depending on the surrounding. And how we design that is something that is very interesting. In the Japanese culture, this is a garden in the Japanese culture, and the gardens in Africa, or in Africa, I don't know whether we should call it a garden, but you try to keep a distance from the nature in Africa. So depending on the locality, nature, the relation to nature is quite different all over the world. And so in this planet Earth, one planet Earth, by keeping this commons, how can we find or how can we make this a common thing? Do you have any idea?
May I? The reason why I changed my research topic, so let me talk about it. When I was master student, I was involved in environmental design houses. So I have involved in artificial designing, which related to experimental houses, for example. And I was very confident around that time. And I went to Africa. I addressed audience talking about environmental-based housing designs, but a lot of people said to me, well, they say, what you are talking about doesn't make sense to us because we don't have energy. But while you're talking about energy saving, it doesn't make sense. But if you see the Earth as a one planet where you're going to hit the balance, so energy saving and artificial things, and also areas where you shouldn't really touch. So this is the nature, so that you should really keep distance with it. So how are we going to create the common understanding? And maybe the Japanese gardeners, where they can learn from Africa. So different perspective must be discussed and incorporated, and wisdom from different parts of the world must be mingled and fused. I think that is what RIHN should do in their activities. Well, just setting aside from the garden, maybe what you want to plant, well, the plant, what kind of trees? For example, in Africa, the eucalypt, Australian eucalypt trees are planted in many parts of Africa nowadays. That's actually degrade the soil. It does actually grow weeds, and then other types of trees do not grow. Therefore, it becomes more like a monolithic. That's why my NGO is promoting to plant local trees. Well, they are specific local trees which can easily grow. That's actually tall in their oral tradition. And I think that leads to the wealthy living of local people. We, I think we must be actually consciously plant local or endemic trees. Well, there are a lot of topics which have been discussed, and there are many viewpoints have been shared with us. I'm not sure whether or how we can really put them into a coherent topic in our symposium. But maybe one of the key words is commons. Another one is boundary. We need to pick out these words. So we share the same planet Earth. Whether we need to or should not draw the lines to create boundaries in the planet. So we have 5 days symposium this time. So we are connecting between Japan, Europe, including France and other continents, and we are going to listen to various viewpoints from different parts of the world, and then we can come back to this topic on the final date. Well, in the beginning I mentioned gorilla, chimpanzee, monkeys, people, they live in the same forest, and there's a connection in the rainforest. And also we talk about cities together with SACKO-san. But cities do not have connection. They don't have connection with landscape. They don't have connection with people. Cities can be created anywhere. Cities can be created on the mountain, on port, or on desert, any locations. And we build too much cities around the world. Therefore, the connections, not only the connections of those which are built by human being, but we must think about our relation with all living beings which live on this planet Earth. The COVID-19, as well as the climate change, are due to too much intervention of human being into nature. Therefore, many living beings are being connected and being connected with food chain. So if we have been able to keep such a chain, such a balance, connection, we shouldn't have been faced with those challenges nowadays. Therefore, we must create some kind of connections in cities. I think that is something we have to really think about how. Sako-san, do you have any
ダニエルさん、
other final comments?
いや、今つながりがすごい重要で、私はだから
Right, yeah, connection is very important.
人間の関係
And
を
well, the
断
architecture
絶してしまったところがあるんですよ。
actually
本来は
divided
つながりを持っているのに、
relation of human
そ
beings.
こが入る
Well,
ことによって我々が分断された。
so because of
で、そこを
architecture, the people
を考えて、だからそれ
were
を
divided. Therefore, we must reconnect relation of people. So maybe
こう自然と
the
関係する
architecture space
取り組み
commons,
過程では重要なんじゃないかなというふうに私は思ってるので、
creating commons into architecture, it's
議論できる
very important for us to bring back nature into our living. Okay, thank you very much. So the Yamagiwa-san said garden is a social function. So when it comes to a place for a social function, you are talking about not only between people, but actually between people and different living beings. Right, that's fine. It's about a place where people can exchange with other living animals, or maybe plants or stones. And, okay, that is maybe our common understanding for a garden in our symposium this time. So maybe we can get out of the natural science viewpoint. Maybe I think what is important here is the analogy. So you see nature as human being, or sometimes you see human as object. So by using words, you are able to make analogies. And in gardens, you can make different analogies. So rather than having a natural science viewpoint on gardens, looking at function or utility, you will limit your discussions. Therefore, rather you should look at it as in chaos. Maybe you don't see the connection between them, but as a whole, you can see the entire picture as a whole. I mean, the wholeness is very important to have a balanced world. Okay, thank you very much. Okay, this is the dialogue. I mean, I can call it the first dialogue between Yamagiwa-san, SACKO-san, but we are going to have another dialogue on the final day, so day 5. So we will have a panel discussion on the final day later to discuss those topics. Now I'd like to talk about a program, how we're going to organize the symposium. For that, I'd like to invite my colleague, Daniel Niles, who is going to explain our symposium, how we are going to proceed with our discussions in coming 4 days.
And I want to share my screen. Shall I do?
Yeah, can we?
Okay. Yes. Yes. Thank you very much, Professor Abe. My name is Daniel Niles. I'm an associate professor of geography at the Research Institute for Humanity and Nature. And it would be nice to make a few comments on this conversation, which has just occurred between Professor SACKO and Professor Yamagiwa. But I fear that there's very little time. I only want to say just 2 phrases out of all of those interesting ideas. 2 phrases which occurred to me. The first, Professor SACKO said, the Japanese people want to get so close to nature that they even create nature. And Professor Yamagiwa sensei said after that, we want relationships with something that changes, and we want to participate in that change. And it's at this point in which the discussion switched from speaking exclusively about gardens to speaking about also the origins of art. And art just as we began with the idea of gardens as a common, very quickly the idea of art as a commons, and more profoundly, art as a mode, a kind of communication, a kind of self-expression. And it seems to me then that we have combined these ideas here in the discussion, just as we have done in organizing our thoughts about this symposium, that gardens and arts emerge from the same source or similar sources. That is the deep patterns of life that people have experienced in places. And the arts are a kind of a dialogue about this experience. And this is exactly the goal of our symposium here today, in the next coming 5 days. And so I'd like to say a little bit about the program, the symposium program and the structure. Well, as you see in the slide, we have 5 days of discussions. And each day, each following day, we have kind of in respect for RIHN's approach to the knowledge production, each day will combine an academic and a public session. Each day will combine artistic and scientific approaches on even footing. And the goal of the structure of combining specialist presentations in the academic sessions and allowing for more free-flowing discussions in the public sessions is to deepen the dialogue between these different realms of knowledge and practice. And so I'd like to point out that the public, even though we have academic sessions in the afternoons and public session in the evening in Japanese time, that the public is welcome at all sessions. And you can always, as a participant, use Zoom in order to make comments and to ask questions. And we will do our best to incorporate those into the proceedings as we go. I think there's very little time to speak much about the key themes, but I want to highlight again the idea of the arts of life, the arts of living, and the arts of life. And we really focus on this idea in order to assert the value of real life, vernacular, and artistic traditions and practices, which exist here in Japan and also all around the world. And the value of these alongside the human and the natural sciences, so that we can begin a discussion between these different regimes of knowledge and practice. And that's really a key idea which runs through all of the 5 days. And a theme which follows on that, and which we have already opened here tonight, is that these arts also express different kinds of knowledge of nature. And that the arts that we are talking about, what we have called here the arts of living, these traditions and practices, these are existing in the cultural realm, in gardens, in food practices, in the traditional arts, in folk cultures. And we can see these not just as cultural phenomena, but also as bodies of environmental knowledge. And beyond the human realm, we can also begin to look at the arts of other non-human agents, plants and soils and insects, microbes, different kinds of animals, and even the weather, that we must recognize are also involved as co-creators of our cultural realm, so that we can treat nature not as a set of facts, a set of phenomena working according to a mechanistic logic, but instead as a kind of inexhaustible source of the unknown. And we begin to see, as we had raised already in the question of the gardens, that these different elements, the animals, the plants, each brings a different kind of knowledge of this dimensions, of this whole that Professor Yamagiwa was speaking at just at the end. And the last thought, which runs throughout our symposium and would again appeared already tonight, is that the arts exist in an aesthetic dimension, which is oftentimes considered to be kind of secondary to other more important human material concerns. But this aesthetic dimension expresses something fundamental about the human experience of the earth. And the aesthetic sense is, in effect, as we said before, a kind of a mode the arts as a kind of a mode of communication about the human experience. It's at the essence of the arts of living. And it is therefore, this experience, relevant to what we today consider the challenges of the Anthropocene or of the sustainability, or we can say more generally, the aesthetic sense, the arts, these practices are relevant directly to the way in which we can redirect the way that societies live in the earth today. So those are the three key ideas. And as Professor Abe, I think, mentioned in the very beginning, our idea is not to establish a single answer, a single line, but rather to open up a field for discussion, a field for many different ideas from many different perspectives and different traditions of knowledge. And our symposium is structured in order to do this. Today, we have been in what we call the prelude. And tomorrow we turn to the opening, that is, to the idea of earthly intelligence, the planetary vernacular. And here we are looking really at the different forms of consciousness and cognition which are non-human, which exist beyond the human realm. And in this session, we will open with several papers of specialists who think about non-human cognition, primates, animals in gardens, and the idea of the responsibilities between these different kinds of agents. That session will begin tomorrow at 12 o'clock Japanese Standard Time, which is 4 o'clock in the morning in Paris. I'm very sorry about that, it's very early. And 10 o'clock at night in Eastern Standard Time. And then in the afternoon, or in the evening rather, we'll go to the public session at 7 o'clock in Japanese Standard Time with an open discussion following, involving two of our esteemed panelists, Tim Ingold and Augustin Burke, whose names have already been mentioned here tonight, with Frederic Julien, our colleague in France, serving as moderator. And I think because of the time, I don't go through the rest of the program right now. The program is online and you are welcome to see it there. As I said, tomorrow we begin again at 12 o'clock Japan Standard Time. And so with that, I would just like to thank very much our panelists tonight, Professor Yamagiwa, Director General of the Research Institute of Humanity and Nature, Professor SACKO, the President of Kyoto Seika Daigaku, which is just up around the corner. And of course, my colleague, Professor Abe, who opened the presentation, and Frederic Julien there in France. Thank you very much for the co-organizers. It's really a pleasure for me to open the session today. I look forward to 5 days of engaging presentations. Thanks also to all of our colleagues who are coming to us from around the world to participate in this events over the next few days. We welcome you at any time that is convenient. Please write in with your questions and we will do our best to include you in the discussions that will occur. And so with that, thank you all very much this evening and good night.
Thank you.